Government extends mass testing program for COVID by 3 days. Hospital authority moves to protect elderly most at risk from COVID. And British COVID vaccine trial stopped after participant falls ill.
Hello and welcome to TVB News. The government is extending its mass COVID-19 testing program by 3 days until Monday.
Health authorities continue to urge people who haven't been tested to use the extension to get checked out. Pinky Wong reports.
The 3-day extension of the program will see 57 of the 122 testing centers continue to remain open. Around 1.36 million people have already taken the test under the community testing program. 19 cases of COVID-19 have been detected from the scheme.
From some preliminary analysis of these cases, there are young people, there are old people, there are also people who are retired, but there are also people who are working and also related to some clusters. So therefore, we want to have a strong encouragement for those who have not participated.
Secretary for Education Kevin Yeung wrote to public schools appealing to parents, teachers and students to take the test before schools resume face-to-face classes in stages from September 23rd. As of yesterday, more than 2,300 people took the test more than once.
If you look at it from the public health and also from controlling the epidemic angle, it's not just about yourself, but it's also about the community. We all want the community to overcome the current wave of epidemic, and so that we could all return to our normal business and activities, including work, travel, or others.
All specimens collected are sent to laboratories managed by Sunrise Diagnostic Center Limited, but officials today reviewed more labs are involved. They include labs from KingMed Diagnostic Hong Kong Limited, Hong Kong Molecular Pathology Diagnostic Center Limited, and China Inspection Limited. Officials stress all institutions have passed external quality assessments. Health officials are urging employers and employees who work in industries where social distancing measures are being relaxed to take the test to reduce infection risk for the public. Pinky Wong, TVB News.
Well, the hospital authorities stepping up measures to protect elderly patients from the coronavirus. The effort at public hospitals comes after new figures revealed a significantly higher fatality rate among seniors over the age of 80.
Meanwhile, the city reported 6 new COVID-19 cases today. Haley Zhou has more.
The hospital authority says elderly coronavirus patients staying at care homes have the highest mortality rate.
These cohort or this group of elderly, in particular, we need to protect them, okay, from the catching the coronavirus. For the elderly who's admitted to our hospital, we will test them, okay, we will screen them at least for once.
Among the roughly 4,000 COVID patients reported by early August, the mortality rate of those aged between 60 and 79 living in their homes was about 2%, but the rate hit 14% for the same age group staying at care homes.
This is probably due to, as you know, those who living in the residential care home, they usually have more chronic illness.
As of August 7th, the overall mortality rate among COVID-19 patients in Hong Kong was 1.8%. But the mortality rate for those in their 80s was almost 27%, and for those over 90, it reached 34%. To protect them, public hospitals may extend testing to all patients.
No matter if you are elderly or not elderly, okay, once you're in the hospital, you got a test, and then we think that will be reduce the chance of some people bringing the virus in the hospital and contracting the elderly.
Meanwhile, the city reported 6 new cases today. One of them, a Tue Mun resident, was identified through the mass testing scheme. 2 are former patients discharged from hospitals last month who have developed antibodies against the virus.
Even though we understand the virus may be still detected in the body for quite a while, but it's considered not infectious.
Haley Zhou, TVB News.
Well, as the government here talks about the opening up of travel bubbles with other countries, Australia says Hong Kong is way down the list of regions it wants to reopen its borders to.
Still, officials say they have made progress in talks with places like Thailand and Japan. Kana Chu tells us more.
Hong Kong's on and off plans to expand international travel are on again, as the government revealed it's holding travel bubble talks with 11 countries.
Countries such as New Zealand and Australia, they are interested in talks with Hong Kong, but they need to establish their own travel bubble measures.
According to a spokesperson of the Australian Consulate General, Australia will only discuss relevant arrangements with New Zealand at this stage. Borders will then open up further to include Pacific Island countries such as Fiji. Considerations will be given lastly to other nations and regions, including Hong Kong. In a radio program, Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development Edward Yao said discussions with Japan and Thailand have entered a stage where health authorities are involved. But it still takes time for both sides to hammer out details over mutually recognized testing and quarantine arrangements. Among other things, bilateral agreements are expected to shorten isolation periods travelers must undergo when reaching their destinations. Yao said the more than 1 million citizens taking part in the community testing program will generate useful data for other countries to consider. And that goes both ways when the city vets overseas standards for coronavirus screening, says lawmaker Yu Si-wing, representing the hard-hit tourism sector. While welcoming the plan, he said members of the sector hope to take it one step at a time to prevent any missteps from causing further delays. Kana Chu, TVB News.
The chief executive is expected to deliver her policy address to LegCo on October 14th.
The Liberal Party today met with the CE to propose measures to boost the economy, which has been hit hard by the pandemic.
We pursue, as we think is the right approach for the government to help us out, the caterers, the retailers, to help out like Singapore. 2 months rent the government will pay for us, and ask the landlords to also give 2 months. We're also calling for rates to be waived for 6 months and no limit to it. So that will help. Also, for me, I've been asking for restaurants on their sizes. We have done that before. Different licenses have different sizes. So the bigger they are, the more relief that they can get.
Overseas clinical trials for a coronavirus vaccine taking place at Oxford University have been put on hold. This after a test subject had a bad reaction to the shot.
The WHO had previously highlighted the Oxford vaccine as being one of the most likely to successfully pass clinical trials. Daniel Roll has more.
The halting of the coronavirus vaccine trial has been described as routine by AstraZeneca, the pharmaceutical company which has been working on the project in conjunction with Oxford University since April. In an email statement, AstraZeneca added that the pause was voluntary and was done to allow an independent safety review to take place. The nature of the adverse reaction that led to the pause has yet to be publicly disclosed. Reports from website Stat News, where the story was broken, suggested the patient is likely to recover. The Oxford vaccine was earmarked by the WHO as a potential candidate for widespread distribution. This after it successfully passed through phases 1 and 2 of testing earlier this year. The vaccine's phase 3 trials launched just weeks ago, incorporating 30,000 test subjects in the UK and other countries. The reports of the adverse reaction, however, mean that all international vaccination research linked to the Oxford study will be suspended until further notice. A final decision on whether to restart the trial is likely to be made in the coming days by medical regulator the MHRA. AstraZeneca is among 9 pharmaceutical companies who pledged to only apply for regulatory approval after 3 stages of clinical trials were concluded. Johnson & Johnson, BioNTech, GlaxoSmithKline and Pfizer are among the signatories of the agreement. The WHO asserts that 180 coronavirus vaccines are currently being tested. None have so far successfully passed the 3 stages of testing. Daniel Rowell, TVB News.
The British government has banned gatherings of more than 6 people in England. This in a bid to control a recent spike of coronavirus cases throughout the country. The move came after British Health Secretary Matt Hancock outlined plans to improve Britain's test and trace program.
People of all ages are affected by long COVID, and people who are younger, who might think that they're unlikely to get severe symptoms or die of COVID, can still have a terrible illness that completely changes their lives for months and months and months. We have had these operational issues that I've talked about. We've had a problem with a couple of contracts, and we discussed some of that in the House of Commons. But it's a matter of a couple of weeks until we can get all of that sorted in the short term, in the immediate term.
The new social gathering limits in England will apply to both indoor and outdoor activities, including private homes, restaurants, and parks. Failure to comply with the measures could result in a £100 fine. Weddings, schools, funerals, and organized team sports are, however, exempt from the restrictions. And still ahead on the news, the first batch of court appearances over last year's PolyU siege. Trump trashes Joe Biden and Kamala Harris over their plans for the economy and the pandemic.
Welcome back to TVB News. A local court heard 2 cases in connection with last year's protests during the siege of Polytechnic University.
As Dong Yao-nie reports, 48 people face charges, including rioting and unlawful assembly.
A long queue for public hearing seats at the Kowloon City Magistrates Court. That's before dozens of youngsters appeared at court today to face charges related to the protests and police siege of Polytechnic University last year. They are among the demonstrators who took to the streets on November 18th last year in support of the protesters besieged at the PolyU campus. Many were arrested by the police. 28 people are charged with unlawful assembly related to the protests in Tsim Sha Tsui on that day. The defendants, aged between 16 and 37, identified themselves as students, teachers, nurses. They allegedly gathered at the Science Museum and acted in a disorderly manner. A 28-year-old female defendant faces an additional count of possessing an offensive weapon. All have been granted bail of $5,000. They are forbidden to leave the city and must observe a curfew during the period. The next hearing is scheduled for October 19th. Meanwhile, another 20 people appeared at court related to separate protests on the same day on Nathan Road in Yau Ma Tei. They are charged with rioting. 4 of them are also charged with possession of an offensive weapon or an instrument fit for unlawful purposes. The case has been transferred to the district court for the next hearing at the end of this month. Police earlier warned that more related arrests and prosecutions might come. Dong Yao-nie, TVB News.
Police are accusing a nurse of doxing police officers who visited a private clinic she worked at last year. The 25-year-old was charged with access to a computer with criminal or dishonest intent and disclosing personal data obtained without consent from data users. She will appear at the West Kowloon Magistracy on the 22nd of this month. Police are reminding the public of an interim injunction order on the doxing of police officers and their family members.
Police have arrested 15 people in connection with a series of shoplifting, burglary, and car theft cases over the past 10 months. The suspects, aged between 16 and 52, are accused of stealing goods and cash worth around $1.8 million. 3 of them were arrested last night in Tin Shui Wai. The police say they mainly targeted Japanese cars that they found easy to steal. The police suspect they have triad backgrounds.
Overseas again, after a month-long delay, diplomats from the 10-Nation Association of Southeast Asian Nations have kicked off annual talks amid the turmoil of the pandemic and rising tensions in the South China Sea. Host Vietnam, which has seen a resurgence in COVID-19 infections, put on an austere opening ceremony in Hanoi, which was attended by a few dozen diplomats. Talks are expected to focus on a regional response to the pandemic and ways to help member states recover economically. The contagion has devastated regional industries and sparked the worst economic recessions in decades. The Philippines and Indonesia each have more than double the infections reported by China, where the outbreak began. Ministers will meet other Asian and Western counterparts by video conference, including those from the U.S. and China, for talks later this week.
With less than 2 months to go before the U.S. presidential elections, President Donald Trump is stepping up his visits to key battleground states.
In a bid to win votes, Trump is using the events to ramp up attacks on his rival, Democrat Joe Biden, and his running mate, Kamala Harris. After withdrawing the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord, rolling back numerous environmental regulations, and expanding offshore oil and gas drilling, Trump appeared in Florida with an election year reversal. He announced an extension to an offshore drilling ban, proclaiming himself the greatest environmentalist since Theodore Roosevelt. Then he took another shot at his rival.
The approach of Joe Biden and the radical left is exactly the opposite. Their policies will destroy jobs, cause energy prices to double and triple and quadruple, to skyrocket beyond belief, and the environment will be badly hurt.
From Florida, Trump headed for North Carolina, where he complained about the state's restrictive coronavirus guidelines as he flouted health restrictions on outdoor events.
We built the greatest economy in the history of the world. We were forced to close it because of the China plague that came in.
This time, Trump went after Biden's running mate, Senator Kamala Harris.
Nobody likes her. She could never be the first woman president. She could never be. That would be an insult to our country.
Observers say the visits to must-win states come amid worries that the base that helped sweep Trump to power during the 2016 presidential election has eroded.
And in 2016, it was a choice between A or B. And a lot of people chose what they thought was the lesser of two evils. This is a referendum on Trump. Trump is really trying to motivate his base. He's trying to squeeze every drop out of that base.
As American schools reopen, Beaumont adds no one knows how safety concerns during the pandemic will impact the electorate, especially in suburbs where evidence suggests Trump needs to boost his support.
Fire has swept through Greece's largest refugee camp, leaving more than 12,000 migrants in desperate need of shelter. The overcrowded Moria refugee camp on the island of Lesbos had been placed under COVID-19 lockdown. Migrants fled after several fires broke out overnight, gutting much of the camp and surrounding area. The cause of the fires is being investigated, but officials aren't ruling out arson. There were no reports of injuries. Additional restrictions had recently been imposed at the camp after a testing drive revealed 35 people were infected with the virus. Greece's prime minister has held an emergency meeting to determine what measures to be taken. And that is the news. Thanks for watching.
Good night.